Welcome to Behavioral Groups, the podcast where we explore why we do what we do and how small shifts in behavior can lead to big changes. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. Let me ask you a question, Kurt. Have you ever noticed how certain sayings just really stick with you?
Yeah, I have. I think there's some phrases from the Stoics, which I love. Marcus Aurelius said, "Do each act as if it were your last." Now that's pretty powerful, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. And then they're just like these little bits of philosophy or advice that pop into my head, at least when I'm stressed or uncertain, or just need to have some kind of comforting thought almost.
Yeah. You know, for me, I get like little lines like Mark Twain's comment that the lack of money is the root of all evil.
I like that. I'll take that one. Yeah.
That's a good one. But then there's also more serious ones like James Baldwin's comment where he said, "Ignorance, allied with power, is the most ferocious enemy justice can have." Now, I know that's a little heavy, but it's a really powerful thing. They feel familiar to me. They're comforting. They're just really kind of rewarding to be reminded of from time to time.
Yeah, I love that. And from a behavioral science perspective, that makes a lot of sense. Our brains love these shortcuts, right, Tim? Especially the ones that are built on experience or meaning or rhyme, as a good songwriter might know. Right?
Agreed. Which is where aphorisms come in. Now, aphorisms are short, philosophical sayings that help us interpret the world and guide our decisions when things are complex or uncertain.
And we've learned a couple of things about aphorisms that are worth noting here. For instance, aphorisms don't tell us what to do. They help us decide how to think about something. And another important element is that they should always be able to be traced back to someone who wrote them in the first place. They're not by anonymous. They are by someone.
That's right. They're not. It's not like graffiti. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, but here's another interesting part. Some aphorisms can be helpful at one point in life and maybe less helpful at another point.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we want you, our listeners, to take away from this discussion is this. An aphorism that serves you well at 25 may not serve you as well at 45 or even 65. And what steadies you in a period of crisis might limit you during periods of growth. Changing things up is key.
That is the message at the heart of today's conversation with James Geary, the author of The World in a Phrase.
Now, James has spent years studying and writing aphorisms, not as rigid rules, but as living tools that adapt with us as we move through the different phases of our lives.
In our conversation with James, we'll explore how aphorisms act as cognitive heuristics, portable bits of wisdom that help us orient ourselves when the path isn't quite so obvious. And in case you'd like an example, here's James with an aphorism for why he thinks you should be listening to Behavioral Grooves.
You should listen to Behavioral Grooves because Wittgenstein said, uttering a word is like striking a note on the keyboard of the imagination. And the conversations that you will hear on Behavioral Grooves will be a symphony to your ears. Check it out.
I don't think I could have said that better myself, Tim.
Yeah.
That is one poetic and informative way of instilling some wisdom and hopefully getting people to listen. Okay. Although we would like it if you listen to Behavior Grooves for the rest of your life, wisdom, as we know, isn't about clinging to the same sayings forever.
Right. It's actually about knowing when it's time to reach for a new approach or a new set of tools, new mindsets that might suit your particular situation that you're in now better than others.
Yeah. Now, before we get to our conversation with James, we want to remind you that Tim and I have been bootstrapping this Behavioral Grooves podcast along for the past 8 years without any formal funding. So we've delivered over 500 episodes to listeners in more than 140 countries. And we do it because we love it, butt, Tim?
Okay, so that you might be asking why this message now. Well, our subscriptions that help us produce the podcast and the outsourced service costs that we use, they've gone up. And if you'd like to sponsor us, great. Send us a line.
Please, please. Yeah.
If you'd like to contribute via our Substack, that's great too. But
we also have a Patreon thing.
We have a Patreon.
Join Patreon for us. Yeah.
Lots of ways to help there. But frankly, we'd rather be earning our way by helping you apply the behavioral science that we love so much. So much to you and to your business.
Yeah. So if you're in a place where you go, this work, this behavioral science information could be valuable to us, just send us a note. We'd love to start that conversation. If you want to improve the effectiveness of your teams, how you're working with your team, that would be a great way that both Tim and I can definitely help you. If you want to improve the cohesiveness of your culture, how does that culture work and shape, and understanding how that culture is driving behavior? Well, Tim and I could be the people for you, right? If you are looking for tools to help communicate your incentive plans or to engage and motivate your employees, well, hey, we are probably two of the best guys in the world to help you with that. And if you want to address those nasty behavioral issues that your employees or your team or your coworkers might be having that are just getting in the way of people having positive change, or getting in the way of your teams finding their groove, well, I guess maybe we might be able to help.
It's our groove. That is our groove. And that's what we'd love to do. And we would love to help you out. Just drop us a line. Let's get started on building a solution that will make you and your teams into heroes.
Heroes. That's what we want to make you. All right.
Okay. So back to our episode on James and aphorisms.
All right. So let's sit back and relax with a fine aphoristic cocktail and enjoy our conversation with James Geary.
James Geary, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really delighted to be here.
It's our pleasure, and we're going to loosen things up with our famous speed round. So let's start by finding out, if you had to live a year without either your laptop or your mobile phone, which would you sacrifice?
Phone, no question about it. Gotta have
no
the laptop.
question.
Gotta have the laptop to write.
I like that. I like that.
You're not. I mean, I can't write on a phone. I'm sorry. Nothing.
What about like a 1959 Smith Corona manual?
I used to use back in the day. I used to use an electric typewriter. I could do it longhand, but then I found that I'm increasingly unable to read my own handwriting.
That's problematic.
That would be problematic during the revision process, I think.
Or maybe better, because now it's like, I have to rethink the whole thing, and I have
true.
to.
It might be easier. So let me take the phone then. Let me take.
I don't know if we've had anybody switch their answer on those before.
Sorry, that against the rules.
Yeah. Okay. All right, James, are you're in London right now? But are you a coffee drinker or a tea drinker?
Oh my God, coffee, 100%, 100%.
They haven't converted you then,
and my laptop. But not coffee on my laptop.
That would not be a good combination. No,
definitely not. Okay, third speed round question. Is the back of a George Harrison poster the ideal place to start writing your aphorisms down?
It is, and if you'd like to see that poster,
yes,
it's the one right there in the middle.
There it is,
right there.
You've got it framed. This is fantastic. This was an important day in your life, apparently.
Yeah, the George Harrison all three of those posters that I describe in the book I still have them, and they're hanging on my study wall.
Oh my gosh,
love that. Okay,
we'll talk about that. I think, but this is a speed round, so we'll continue on. Otherwise, we'll get right into the interview. The last of our speed round questions is this: Is it a good idea to make your own fortune cookies of your own aphorisms to
Yes.
pass out
I
at
mean,
poetry readings or parties or whatever it is that you're doing?
I'm shocked you would even consider asking me that question. Of course it is. Of course it is.
All right, so
Um,
that's the last of the speed round questions. So tell that story at least a little bit, because I found that one really fascinating. Yeah.
Oh, so I lived in, after graduating from college, I lived in San Francisco, and I was a poor, struggling, starving poet. And I get paid every 2 weeks. And when I got paid, my first stop was Chinatown to go to Sam Woe's restaurant and have some noodles there. Sam Woe's, I should add, was closed down a couple of years ago for hygienic violations of the laws of hygiene. Although I emerged relatively healthy from my patronage there.
Maybe you had a good immune system in your early 20s.
Yes, and it helped boost my immune system. So I would spend a lot of time in Chinatown because the food was cheap and the portions were plentiful. And I was doing these poetry readings, and I was writing aphorisms myself and had been for some time. But I was doing poetry readings in which I would do the little globe trick. And here's the globe.
There it is.
During my poetry readings, I would walk through the crowd with aphorisms written on slips of paper, and I would ask people in the audience to pick a slip of paper from the globe and read the aphorism out loud, and then I would kind of riff on that aphorism and that aphorist. And I would do that with my poems as well. And then I had the idea, since I was so addicted to Chinese food, that I could have, instead of just slips of paper, I could have fortune cookies with my own aphorisms inside. And so there's a little dank little alley, I forget the name of it, but right across from Sam Woe's, and there was a fortune cookie factory in there. And I went there with my slips of paper, about 100 of them, and none of the people who worked there spoke English. I didn't speak Chinese, but it was evident when I handed over 100 slips of paper what I what I wanted them to do with them. And I just kind of walked around the block for 30 or 40 minutes, came back, and I had 100 freshly baked, steaming fortune cookies with my own aphorisms inside. And I would distribute those at my poetry readings. So highly encouraged.
I just love the idea that there actually is such a thing as a fortune cookie manufacturing building, that there is a place where they actually get made, and
Yeah.
you could just walk there.
Yeah. I was describing it as a building would be generous. It was like a little room.
Okay.
And there was one guy always standing outside smoking a cigarette, and two women inside. I described the process in the book, but there's this huge wheel. It looks like a locomotive wheel, and there's two women on either side of it, and they're kind of grabbing the cookies as they come out and folding the fortune into them. But it was like a single room with boxes of fortune cookies stacked everywhere. It was really tiny, but fascinating. I'll never forget it. So that was like a little ritual for me. When I had a reading coming up, I'd go to Sam Woe's, and I go to the fortune cookie factory, the fortune cookie room, and while they were making my fortunes, I'd have my usual at Sam Woe's.
I love that. We are speaking with James Geary about his new book, and it's all about aphorisms. So we have to start with, there's a lot of people who might not be familiar with what the term mean. What is an aphorism? Can you just help us with what's your best definition today of an aphorism?
An aphorism is just a short, witty, philosophical saying. And that's all it is. And the word is very unusual, and a lot of people haven't heard of it. And when I first discovered aphorisms in Reader's Digest when I was 8 years old, I had never heard of an aphorism either. But we all use aphorisms every day. And it's sort of like still one of the most vital, vibrant forms of oral literature. Because we all, you're talking with someone and they have an issue or they have a problem, and then you say something that maybe has been a saying in your family for generations, or your grandfather used to say, or your great aunt used to say. I had one woman come up to me after a talk and ask me if the following sentence was an aphorism, because it's something that's been going around in her family for years. If you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space. That's an aphorism. It's just a short, witty, philosophical saying. And I think the key thing that differentiates aphorisms from other kinds of short forms of communication, or short sayings, or text messages, or some forms of memes, for example, although memes can also be aphorisms, is that it has to have like a witty twist, and it has to be philosophical. And by philosophical,
go ahead.
in terms of daily life. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You talk about 5 kind of factors or rules that go into that. Can you talk?
Yeah.
What are those 5? So I think you just mentioned a couple of them. Yeah.
I have it on. These 5 laws come to me from very good authority, which is myself. I just made them up. So they must be right.
Of course.
The first law, it must be short. That's short prayer penetrates heaven, is a great aphorism from the medieval monk author of The Cloud of Unknowing. The second law is it has to have an author. It has to be personal. So this is the difference between an aphorism and a proverb. Let sleeping dogs lie. At one point, when someone knew who the first person who said that was an aphorism. But the identity of the author has been worn away by centuries of use, so it becomes a proverb. The third law, it must be definitive. Aphorists don't put any ifs, ands, or buts, or caveats. They're very, very definitive, and they don't give you any evidence either. It's just like Stanislav Lec, one of my Polish aphorists, one of my all-time favorites, one of the greatest of all time. No snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's not like under certain weather conditions, if the light is shining in the correct way, there may or may not be snowflakes that feel responsible. And it's very definitive. And then the fourth and fifth laws are what we were just talking about. It has to have a twist, like a witty twist that could be wordplay, or it could be a psychological twist, or it could be both. And it has to be philosophical. And before I so rudely interrupted Kurt, I was saying philosophy in the sense of like daily life, the existential questions we all face every day. How do I live my life? Who am I? What am I doing here? Oh my God, I'm traumatizing myself even saying those questions out loud. But those are the kind of questions that literature and art always have addressed, and those are the kind of questions that aphorisms address.
So like this person that came up to you and asked you, is this old family saying a aphorism? I'm going to ask one of my own.
Oh, great.
So in college, freshman year in college, at University of Iowa, I'm walking, and there's this small little train tunnel that is filled with graffiti, graffiti all around it, and up in the corner, and there's just little written with a marker, not even spray painted on anything. It was this little thing that said, "Never." Here, actually, I have it written down. Never think you know. And I wrote that down. I've followed it. Now, I don't think it's an aphorism because it doesn't follow that second law, which is I can't attribute it to anybody. And I don't know if there's an attribute there. But I then took it further. And so I like never think you know. And then I added on, know you know. So it's
lovely.
Is either one of those an aphorism from the way that you think about this?
Yes. So I would say never think you know. If we knew the author, it would be an aphorism. And there's a long history of graffiti as aphorisms. Banksy, the British artist Banksy, he's known for his images, but they often contain one-liners. There's a young woman in the U.S. who goes by the Instagram handle Boots, Poetry by Boots, and she posts these. She has these stencils that she uses and posts her aphorisms on lampposts and walls and things like that. One of them is, and a lot of them are about love or romance, and one of them is, you're not asking too much. You're just asking the wrong person,
Mm.
which I think is pretty damn good.
Oh, that
then
is.
there's like the Situationist International group, a kind of leftist group of students in France in the 1960s. They posted their sayings on walls during the protests of 1968 in France. One of my favorites from them is "No forbidding allowed." And also the question, the subject of knowing and doubt has a millennia long history in aphorisms, starting with the oracle at Delphi, "Know thyself."
Yeah.
And Voltaire has a great aphorism about that. It says, doubt is an uncomfortable, what is it? Doubt is an uncomfortable feeling, but certainty is a ridiculous one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
yes, I would say that saying is an aphorism if we knew who the person was. And you are definitely an aphorist. Congratulations with your
score.
with your variation on the saying.
Oh, well, fantastic. Thank you.
James, here at Behavioral Grooves, we're speaking a lot to our podcast is about people and the behavioral science behind our behaviors and the decisions that we make, the choices that we make, the things that influence our decisions. And we often talk about heuristics as being a rule of thumb or a way of guiding our decision making. And I was wondering, to what degree can aphorisms be heuristics? They could be these little guides, these little rules of thumb.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they are. They are aids to decision making. And so the like one of the unique things about aphorisms, and one of the things that I like about them, what is also a little bit uncomfortable, is that they don't solve any problems. In a way.
Yeah.
And they don't make you feel good. Generally. They don't make you feel good about yourself, or they tend to reinforce. So in terms of heuristics, aphorisms occur in moments of need, in moments of emergency. You're facing a personal crisis, or you're in doubt. You have to make a decision. So you reach for any kind of instruction or guide that you can lay your hands on. And aphorisms have been those for me my whole life, but also aphorisms are the oldest written art, originally in oral form, but they're also the oldest written art form on the planet. Ancient China, ancient Egypt, the first aphorisms were recorded 5,000 years ago. So as a heuristic device, an aphorism doesn't tell you what to do. It immerses you more deeply in the problem or the dilemma or the choice. So it confronts you, it concentrates your mind so that you can make the choice. So Jenny Holzer, contemporary American artist, works with language a lot and aphorisms a lot. One of her aphorisms is, playing it safe can cause a lot of damage in the long run. And, think about that. If you've got an important career decision to make, or you're considering starting your own business, or you're considering getting into a relationship with someone who you don't know very well or have some doubts about, an aphorism like that can be really useful. It doesn't tell you what to do, but it does kind of give you a different perspective on it. I'll give you one more example. When some years ago, I was made redundant from a job that I had, and I kind of expected it to happen, but was in denial, as we often are about things that are inevitable and unpleasant. But when it finally happened, my first feeling was like financial terror. I had 3 young children, a family, and I was just thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? And a nanosecond later, an aphorism by Wilhelm Eklund, a Swedish aphorist, popped into my mind. And the aphorism is, to be placed on treacherous ground is good. We only learn to stand on our own 2 feet when the ground is shaking underneath them. And for me, that's like a heuristic. That's a heuristic device. It doesn't solve my problem. It doesn't like magically create or manifest an income stream for me.
No.
But it kind of centers me in the core of the dilemma and then helps me focus my attention, concentrate my attention on making the right decision. One last example of how I think aphorisms work as heuristic devices. Another Polish aphorist, Wisław Brudzinski. The most difficult thing to find is the way to the signposts. And like in life, isn't that so often the case? It's like when you're in the midst of a crisis or an important decision that you have to make under pressure. It's like, give me a sign. Give me a sign. How do I know which way to go?
Right.
And so the most difficult thing is to find the way to the signposts, and aphorisms are those signposts.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Do aphorisms need to be true?
Yes. No, unfortunately, they do not. The truth is the not one of the 5 laws, and you can vehemently disagree with an aphorism. And I read hundreds of aphorisms that I admire and with which I vehemently disagree.
Okay.
They're still aphorisms, and the truth of it is like, yes, they should be true in the factual, empirical sense.
Okay.
The philosophical truth is for you to decide. So there's a great example of this. What was his name? Joseph Prescott and G.K. Chesterton. They were friends, and Joseph Prescott wrote a book of aphorisms, and they were kind of Nietzschean in their approach, and so they were all about intuition and action and things like that. And one of his aphorisms, Joseph Prescott, was don't think, do. So that's the kind of, you can, is that true? It might be true in some cases. It might not be true in other cases.
Right.
So this book collector, whose name is escaping me at the moment, but he came across a book, Joseph Prescott's book, in a used bookshop. And he was paging through it, and it had these little scribblings after each of the aphorisms. And this guy happened to be a G.K. Chesterton expert. G.K. Chesterton, really great English novelist and wit and essayist. And he noticed that, hey, that is G.K. Chesterton's handwriting. And after each of Joseph Prescott's so this was G.K. Chesterton's copy of Joseph Prescott's book. And in the book, he wrote a riposte to each of Prescott's aphorisms. And under the one that said, don't think, do, he wrote, do think, do. So those two pieces of advice are diametrically opposed. They both can't be true, but they both can be true. In terms of the philosophical truth of that as a kind of an embodiment of your attitude towards life, your approach to decision making, your approach to heuristics as a heuristic device. Wynton Marsalis, think long, think wrong. He was talking about musical improvisation, and in sports, in music, in the arts, and generally acting, for example, being improvisational, being spontaneous is what you want to be. Don't think, do. On the other hand, in life, sometimes do think, do before you make a very stupid decision is good advice. So it's a really interesting question. Are they true? They need to be empirically, factually true to be credible, but philosophically true, they can be self-contradictory.
Hey Groovers, quick break from the conversation to talk about something we don't bring up enough on the show.
Yeah, that's right. When we're not behind the mic, we're working with organizations to apply behavioral science in ways that actually move the needle for leaders teams, and whole cultures.
So whether it's designing smarter incentives, boosting engagement, setting goals that actually stick, or helping teams navigate change, we bring real science to real workplace challenges.
And we don't just talk theory. Our approach blends research-backed insights with hands-on strategies that drive results. Now, we've seen small behavioral shifts lead to big wins in Fortune 500 companies and scrappy startups and even in mission-driven nonprofits.
Yeah, and we bring the same curiosity, creativity, and care to our client work that we bring to every episode of the show.
Really, I think people might want more than what we bring to the show.
You probably have a point there. You're probably right.
Okay, so we'll bring more care and creativity to our work with you and your teams than what we do on the show.
Yes, more care. So if you're ready to build stronger motivation, better team dynamics, and maybe even make your workplace a little more groovy,
yeah, reach out to us. Grab us on LinkedIn or Facebook, or just drop us a line. We'd love to help you and your team find your groove.
It reminds me, Rory Sutherland, we've had on the show, and one of the things that he said is the opposite of a good idea is a good idea, or can be a good idea, which sounds exactly like what you're saying here to a certain degree.
Yes.
Yes, you can have an aphorism that is absolutely 100%, meaningful to you, and there can be an opposite that parlays itself into a different situation, a different context, maybe a different time in your life, or maybe it doesn't apply to you, but it applies to Tim because he's, Tim, and that would, it would be the wrong one, but it would be Tim's. So,
well, I can't escape the idea that Chesterton sort of contradicts in a paradoxical form, like the original text, and that Chesterton, and it's not ironic that Chesterton, of course, is a big fan of paradoxes. So,
yes.
There's this. It's so meta. I'm sorry for me just to be thinking about that. I just love it. Well, it also just makes me think about, are the lessons that come from these messages that we get through the aphorisms, are they intended for specific points in our lives as well? Like, could there be aphorisms that are really applicable to us as young people, but not so much in middle age, or really applicable in middle age, but not so much in the latter part of our life? Is there a contextual basis for them as well?
I think so. It depends on the aphorism. For example, to be placed on treacherous ground is good. The Wilhelm Eklund one, I think, applies to everyone at any age.
Right.
Yep.
But for example, I came up with may I share one of my own aphorisms?
Oh, please.
I hate to be self-promotional, but it responds exactly to your question. And I wrote this in my 20s, in my fortune cookie days. Some people have salad days. I have fortune cookie days. Young people should picnic in active volcanoes.
Yeah.
That is not advice I would give to older people.
No.
Right.
But at a recent talk about the book that I gave, someone asked about if I wrote aphorisms myself, which is my favorite question of all, as you can imagine. And so I said that one, and she said, why not old people or older people? Why not middle-aged people?
Yeah.
And I thought, people should picnic in active volcanoes of any age.
So you'd like to revise your...
I would like to revise that, if I may, yes. But so that's sort of like Jenny Holzer's advice. Playing it safe can cause a lot of damage in the long run, which is, I don't think I knew Jenny Holzer's aphorism when I originally wrote that in my 20s, but it's the same spirit. Like, young people should picnic in active volcanoes. Do something that's a little bit daring when you're young and you have the chance. And if you fail, it's not as big as a deal as if you're in your 50s and you fail. So, and then there's a great, who is it? Is it Mark Twain or is it La Rochefoucauld? Old people are fond of giving good advice. it consoles them for no longer being able to set a bad example. And that's one that doesn't apply to young people, I think.
Right.
And I think there's also a difference. Sorry, I'm going on a little bit long on this.
No,
one.
this is great.
I think you need a certain degree of life experience to understand certain aphorisms.
Right.
So I remember sharing an aphorism at a talk I was doing at a university. So these were undergraduates, and I forget who wrote this aphorism, but it goes like this: memoirs are the back stairs to history. And I always thought that's genius. That's brilliant. It's such an interesting way to compare and contrast an autobiographical story with the more objective, allegedly objective, kind of big picture of history. And none of the students got it. And I thought about it, and I thought, yeah, they probably haven't been around long enough to understand like how history is compiled or what memoirs do. And so I think there's a certain, also it's like when you read a book and you don't get it, and then you try and read it again 5 or 10 years later and you do get it and you love it. So I think, yes, some aphorisms apply to certain periods of our lives. Some are kind of universally applicable, but I think we are also primed, to use a behavioral science term. Hey,
thank you.
There.
Bing, 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 bing.
Extra points for that.
Absolutely.
I think we're primed to be responsive to certain aphorisms, either in certain phases of our lives chronologically or certain kinds of experiences, like heartbreak at any age. Love is that brief moment of time when someone else feels the same way about us as we do about ourselves. That's Magdalena Samovičić. That's a kind of observation about love that I think someone who's a little bit older would get better than someone who's a little bit younger.
Yeah. Or Diogenes' comment about to own nothing is the beginning of happiness.
Yes.
I think that would be really difficult for me as a 20-year-old to like, well, why would I embrace that? That doesn't make any sense. But as someone who's older than 20, it would be easier for me. Let me say that, not to get too specific. Anyway, Kurt's like, okay, let's move on.
James, I want to go back because we started in the speed round talking about writing on the back of your George Harrison, and you showed us. You started like with aphorisms at a relatively young age. I mean, this isn't something that I think most early teenagers are like, falling in love with, but you started reading Reader's Digests, and tell us that story.
Yeah. So Reader's Digest has in every issue, or had in every issue, a page of quotable quotes. And that's a collection, just like a random, I'm sure it's not random, it's carefully curated selection of quotes from a wide variety of people. And there weren't really many or any books in my house when I was a kid growing up, and we had Time magazine and Reader's Digest. Those were the things to read. And for some reason, I was an avid reader from as young as I can remember. And I remember the quotable quotes section. And I remember reading, "The difference between a rut and a grave is the depth." That's a Gerald Burrell, the former Archbishop of Chicago, Episcopal Archbishop of Chicago. That's something I didn't understand at all when I read that. And I must have been not even in double digits age-wise at that time.
But you remember it.
Oh, yeah. I never forgot it. And it was branded into my mind. And I thought, wow, I had no idea what it meant, but I thought, there's something about that saying. There's something special going on. And I want to find out what that is. Some of the others, were more quippy. I wouldn't even call them aphorisms today. and those I kind of understood. Lots of puns and wordplay and fun. So like something about the wordplay and the fun of it, but I also sense this deeper, like we were talking about earlier, this deeper philosophical meaning that was way beyond me when I was 8, 9, 10, however old I was. But I always remembered that sentence, and I always remembered what you could achieve in a single sentence. Like the difference between a rut and a grave, that's maybe 8 words, 9 words, but it's a novella.
Yeah.
It's a really complex, it has a story arc, and it has, characters, and that's another good one that I think I've come to appreciate much more as I've gotten older. It's not one, as an 8-year-old, I hadn't the faintest clue what it was about. And I should say, like I mentioned before, I had no idea what an aphorism was, never heard the word in my life. But when I became a teenager, I started reading novels and getting assigned to read novels and poetry in high school English classes and things like that. I started seeing these kind of sentences everywhere. Little single sentences that you could extract from whatever work they were in, and they would stand alone. So there's some people who are aphorists, like Stanislav Letz, who I mentioned. He only wrote aphorisms. But people like, Audre Lorde or James Baldwin or Ralph Waldo Emerson or Henry David Thoreau, they wrote essays or novels or poems or whatever. And there's aphorisms in there that can be extracted. And that's what I did with the posters that I showed you, which are just on the wall behind me. And I can, look back there and I can see, and some of them I even dated, put little dates below them when 1982, 1983, 19 would have been late 70s, I think. And so, and then it was only much, much later that I came to understand, there's a word for these kind of things.
Yeah.
They're aphorisms. And, but I've been collecting them, since I was a teenager. And yeah, but only later did I come to understand them as aphorisms. And for some of the sayings, like the difference between a rut and a grave, it was decades before I understood what that meant.
Yeah. I can see why it would be easy to be attracted to the poets, because they have such economy of words, that they're so focused, Shakespeare being, great among that,
absolutely.
right? Just boiling down really big ideas into very, very short phrases is his stock and trade. And the poets have followed that for years. I also see that in writers like Stephen King. I know that he said that he loves really short stories, and he set out to write a bunch of 4-word stories, and one of those was "baby shoes for sale." Like, oh, like that's an incredible story right there. You can just your imagination just unfolds from baby shoes for sale. It's dark and sad and all those kinds of things. I'm sorry, I'm not driving very closely to a question here as much as
it's okay.
It's a short epistle in the middle of our conversation. But let's get back to something that is so important for us when it comes to aphorisms, and that is the decision-making quality, the way that it informs our decision-making. At what point in this arc of your love of aphorisms do you start to see that they're informative, that aphorisms are providing something more than just a little bit of wit or a clever view, that they're actually informing decision making?
Yeah. And I think that's, again, comes back to that 5th law in terms of decision making. It's the philosophical insight that helps you make that decision. It doesn't make the decision for you. So aphorisms are not like catechisms, where you're told what the answer is.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're not commandments, although they are definitive. It's like, thou shalt not kill. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
It's not an aphorism. It's a command. It's a directive. So aphorisms have that ambiguity. They're definitive, but the ambiguity is, how will you execute on that? Or will you execute on that? And So, in terms of my own understanding of aphorisms as heuristic devices, has to do. So, whenever things happen to me, it's like a lot of things, but especially like inflection points in my life, I will think of aphorisms. If if I'm preparing for some decision, like moving back to London after 12 years in the US, I'll think of aphorisms. Um, One by George Herbert, in fact, an English poet, English metaphysical poet. When you finish the house, leave it. And so again, that is a command, but whether you do or do not leave the house after it's finished, and what exactly he means by that is up to you. And so when I have decisions to make or things happen to me, aphorisms will occur to me. But very often I will play the I Ching, which is the Chinese Book of Changes, which is one of the, if not the earliest book in existence. And it's a book of aphorisms. And it's a collection of like 64 archetypal situations that, growth, decay, birth, death, darkness, light. And it's based on the ancient Chinese philosophy of Taoism. And it's a little complicated how you actually play it, but you do play it and you end up getting one of the sentences, the aphorisms in one of these 64 scenarios. That is also a heuristic device. Yeah. And that scenario, like I played it once when I was going through a kind of emotionally turbulent time in my life, also in San Francisco. And I got the one, the scenario of the well. And the way that the I Ching works is you have this scenario of the well, and it's made up of like 6 individual lines, and each of those lines has an aphorism attached to it. And this one, I was found on the spot where the well is muddy, but the well is being repaired. And I thought, wow, the well. And I started thinking about what the metaphor of a well, what does that mean? What do you find at the bottom of a well? What is the function of a well? Am I well? Do I feel well? And so that was hugely important to me. And it was very kind of positive in the sense that it gave me a sign. Like we were talking about earlier, the hardest thing to find is the way to the signpost. It gave me a sign that I was up to my knees or maybe up to my nose in the mud and silt and muck at the bottom of the well, but that I would repair it and get out. And again, it didn't solve any of my problems, unfortunately, but it gave me some inspiration and some direction to solve it myself.
Hope. I mean, hope.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So for our listeners out there, James, what advice would you give them? I mean, should they be going out and buying books of aphorisms? Definitely buy your book, but
yes.
But
starting with one called "The World in a Phrase." A brief history. Yeah.
But by James Geary, yes.
Yeah, but what should they be taking out of all of this conversation? I mean, it's fascinating. It's great, but all right, what does this mean for me?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is aphorisms are not an esoteric, like elite form of literature or anything like that. They're the most democratic form of literature, and democratic in the sense of small d. They're popular and they're accessible to everyone. So the first thing I would say is just listen. Listen when you're talking to people, when you're talking with friends, especially if you're having like a serious conversation. Listen, and I guarantee you that you will hear an aphorism at some point, or some aphorism adjacent saying. Because in those kind of situations where we're trying to help each other or affirm each other or give each other perspective, we instinctively resort to these kinds of sayings. Hallmark greeting cards, they're not aphorisms, but they come from the same impulse to share words of wisdom at intense moments of joy, bereavement, accomplishment, failure, sickness, health. Right. So the first piece of advice would be just to listen, because you'll hear them all around you. And then pay attention when you're reading things and see if you see them. If you're on the internet or on social media, they're also like a currency on the internet, often wildly misattributed. But if you see one that you like, check out the author, or check out your favorite author, and you might find aphorisms. If you're a fan of Lydia Davis or Jonathan Letham's novels or Lydia Davis's stories, look for the little kernels of aphoristic insight that are contained in them. And then, seek out the authors that you like. But I would also say that aphorisms are for living. So if you just kind of read them and think, that's so true, so true, that's not enough. You have to like playing it safe can cause a lot of damage in the long run. You can just enjoy that as a great aphorism, and it is a great aphorism, but it impels you to actually do something. Aphorisms are practical philosophy that you can apply in your life. Or the difference between a rut and a grave is the depth. I've been in ruts a lot of times in my life, and that aphorism would occur to me, and it made me want to do something. And in fact, it made me do things, like change jobs.
Yeah. To get out of that rut so that you don't go to that grave. And I love this idea of looking at your favorite authors. And one of the ones that I guess it shouldn't have surprised me that you kind of outlined in here was Dr. Seuss. Again, you think about Dr. Seuss, and we're reading those as children's books, but there's some fantastic aphorisms and lessons and like instructions about how to live in there.
Absolutely. He's I love Dr. Seuss. I grew up reading Dr. Seuss. Actually, now that I think about it, those were the Reader's Digest, Time Magazine, and Dr. Seuss were the things to read.
Yes. The triumvirate.
Yeah. And one of he's so interesting because he's very subversive. If you look at his books again as an adult, he never shows the faces of any adults. You only see them like from the waist down.
Yeah.
Children are often alone, and they have to I had trouble in getting to Salo Sulu, which is really scary. It's just a little boy who has to go through this really scary place. But there's also something really affirming about it. From here to there, from there to here, funny things are everywhere. That's a philosophy of life. It's a kind of joyous, mischievous, playful way to approach life and to approach learning. And that was certainly what Dr. Seuss was about, because when he started writing his books, See Spot Run was the way you were supposed to learn how to read. But he said, that's kind of boring. Let's have trouble in getting to Salo Sulu. And so it was a kind of subversive, playful, kind of radical way to learn to read, and he slipped in a lot of great aphoristic insights along the way.
Kurt's and my prep conversation, we talked a lot about Dr. Seuss and some of the aphorisms that we've had in our lives. And one of the things that we were thinking about is how modern, children are growing up and hearing and learning about these things. And we wondered to what degree our musicians, our songwriters specifically, the carriers, the current forebearers of aphorisms today. You mentioned, I think you mentioned David Byrne and Bob Dylan in the book, but I mean, we can think of tons of examples of songwriters today.
I'd love to hear your examples. I'm thinking like Leonard Cohen. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Joni Mitchell. What's this? Oh gosh, my daughter's gonna be furious with me. There's what is his name? There's a contemporary rapper whose lyrics are astonishingly good. Oh gosh,
I'm sure there are. I
Yeah,
don't doubt it. I went to like Paul Simon,
yeah,
with everything put together sooner or later falls apart.
yes.
You know,
Another uplifting aphorism from Paul Simon.
Well, all right. So uplifting, you have Lennon and McCartney, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make.
Oh, that's a lovely one. Yeah, that's a lovely
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
So
I maybe I can look up this. I'll find out the rapper's name I'm thinking of.
do.
yeah.
And I'll send it to you so we can
we'll,
do a
and
voiceover or something.
we'll put it in the show notes if nothing
Yeah,
else, so that people can look for it. So fantastic.
Absolutely. But do you? I guess the question is, to what degree do you think that modern songwriters are the carriers of aphorism today?
That's an interesting question. I would say that they're not the carriers, and I think like sometimes people wonder because of social media, and the emphasis on short form communication, text messaging. Is this the golden age of the aphorism? And in some ways, yes, because those kind of digital forms of distribution make it a lot easier to share aphoristic insights and aphoristic sentences. But in some ways, no, because most of what is shared on social media is anti-aphoristic. It's the opposite of aphorisms.
Right.
It's toxic. It's not meant to make you think. It's to rage bait and hot takes and all that kind of stuff. So that's the opposite of aphorisms. My view is aphorisms, it's always the golden age of aphorisms. And there's never been more or less people or doing, writing, reading, thinking about aphorisms, because they're a constant. And so yes, it occurs in song lyrics and not just contemporary popular music, but from the jazz and blues. Oh my gosh, blues and jazz, the lyrics to those, or some of the Great American Songbook lyricists, brilliant aphorisms in those.
Rodgers and Hammerstein, yeah,
exactly. But also, it's they're always present in whatever form. They're sort of, I was going to say parasites, but they're not parasites. They're like a living creature inside another living creature. It's a novel, but inside that novel, aphorisms are living. It's a poem, but inside that poem, aphorisms are living. It's a song lyrics, but inside those song lyrics, an aphorisms living. And they also exist independently. So it's always, I wouldn't say like popular song is the carrier anymore. We're all carriers. And I'm always astonished when talking with people, they always, like I was saying, we were talking about earlier, people are always saying, is this an aphorism? Is that an aphorism? We always said this in our house. And as soon as you start the conversation, people start coming with their own aphorisms. These are not professional writers.
Right.
They're not artists. They're not, they're not professors of literature. They're just people who instinctively use and apply aphorisms. There's one guy who was at a recent talk, and he said, is this an aphorism? This is advice I recently gave my 20-something sons. Good things happen when you get out of the house.
Sounds like an aphorism.
It is an aphorism. It's great advice for a 20-something young person.
Yeah.
And that's just, so it's just everyone is the carrier of aphorisms, and they're everywhere. And if you tune your antennae to spotting them, you'll spot them all over the place.
James, I think that is a wonderful place to end this conversation. I think the words of wisdom there are just really profound. So thank you for being a guest on Behavioral Grooves.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure and just a lot of fun.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with James, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our never think you know you know brains.
Oh,
there you go.
Snap. Oh, pulling right from like one of your. This is an actual Kurt
This is
Nelson
my now, as
aphorism.
James said, it's my aphorism, right?
It is. You've
Yeah,
authored it.
I took that graffiti from the train tunnel, and I added to it to make it an actual aphorism, because it could be attributed to me and all of those things. So
Yeah. Well, I think this is a great thing about language and about authored pieces. If Bob Dylan had a song with 17 verses and you felt like there's part of the story that hasn't been told, we need an 18th verse, and you wrote that 18th verse and recorded it, you would be a co-author with Bob Dylan.
well,
Right?
is that how that works? I mean,
It is.
yeah. Oh,
It is.
wow.
That's how it works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of amazing. So, okay, but back to aphorisms and James Geary.
It's interesting though when you think about attribution, right? And how important attribution is in a number of these things. And
Yeah.
I think it's what, in today's world with the internet and aphorisms, like the aphorism from, you might think it's from Mark Twain, where I might think it's from, Woodrow
Oh.
Wilson or somebody, because the attributions just get so messed up. That's a whole nother discussion that we don't need to go down today. All right, what do we want to talk about in our grooving session? What are we grooving on today, Tim?
Well, I really like the part of James' conversation that leads us into this idea, and we teed this up in the introduction a bit, but how aphorisms can do two things. One is that they lead us to decisions. They don't make decisions for us. They lead us to decisions. And the second part of it is that because decisions change over the course of our lives and in different situations, that some aphorisms might be great at point A, but not so much at point B.
Okay.
And the reason I think that that's interesting to me is because I used to think that an aphorism is just, it's a universal, it's going to apply to my whole life, and it might not.
Okay. Let's start with that first part, this idea of how aphorisms, from a behavioral science perspective, act as heuristics, right? They're these cognitive shortcuts that reduce our mental loads. They help us think when thinking is hard.
Yeah, maybe we've got stress, or we're at a point of transition, or there's some uncertainty. Those are really great times to look to, well, what are the pieces of wisdoms that might guide us in the direction of helping make a decision, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where James really talked about how we can use these as devices to center us, to kind of pull us out of that whatever mess we're in. It's also a way for us to maybe look at the situation that we're in from a different perspective, or pushes our brain in a different direction than it might have gone otherwise.
Yeah, and in some ways, it's as simple as thinking. I mean, I remember my parents had things to say about very specific situations, right, that they repeated constantly. But if you're at a career crossroads, you might say, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. It might be right. It's an opportunity framing and mindset that can lead you to maybe make better decisions when you're at that career crossroads.
Yeah, the framing part I think is really insightful, because it does help us frame that situation in a way that the wisdom of the aphorism can help you go, oh, yeah, I can frame it from that perspective, as opposed to, oh my God, this is so scary. I'm afraid to give up what I want. Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. That provides a different
Yeah.
lens, a different framing than what you might have been feeling in that moment. So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I just love the way that you emphasize that, because I think that we can sometimes lose framing because of a particular feeling that's dominating us at a particular time, right? If I've been through a lot of change in the last couple of years, and
Yeah.
dramatic change, and I haven't been at my level best, and it's been easy for me just to kind of feel worn out, tired, down, etc. But then a little saying like "this too shall pass" can, because everything changes, like that can be actually helpful in any given day.
Yeah. And given where we are in the world today, I'm in Minneapolis and we're doing this right when there's a whole bunch of chaos going on in my hometown. Those types of aphorisms can both help us from a mental, emotional perspective, but they can also help us move and make a decision. As you said, they're these guides for us. They help orient where we want to go, right?
Yeah.
Orient
Right.
us with these problems. And so, I love that. And in business too, when we think about this, the aphorisms, you go, oh, how do aphorisms work in business? Well, no. I mean, perfect is the enemy of good. All right.
Oh
That helps
yeah.
me get out of paralysis, decision paralysis. So all of
Or
these or
I think about the number of times that we've been working on a PowerPoint, and it's like, okay, yeah, we need to. What about if we just move this just like a quarter of an inch, and then there is. Wait a minute, perfect is the enemy of good. Like
yeah.
it's good enough. Let's do a little satisficing from time to
A little
time.
satisficing there. Yeah. 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 And I think James said this, right? I'm going to try to quote him here. Aphorisms occur in moments of need and moments of emergency. They
Yeah.
don't tell you what to do, they immerse you more deeply in the dilemma. Oh, just stop for a moment and think about that, right? That
Should we just have a
they
moment of silence?
no, we should have a moment of talking about this and thinking about this. Aphorisms occur in moments of need and moments of emergency. There are these aspects that can help in those times where, as you said, you've gone through a lot of change and stress in your life. But as you said, as we've talked about, they don't tell us what to do. But I love this part is they immerse you more deeply
Yeah.
in the dilemma.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I mean,
Because
that is
that's where the insight's going to come, right?
well, and we know this from behavioral science too, is that when we try to ignore something, when we try to push it away, it actually gains more power and various different things. It's the idea of don't think of a white elephant, and what do? You think of a white elephant. There's aspects of this where it comes from stress and discomfort as we try to ignore it. When actually, if you embrace it and you kind of feel it, you name it, you do all of those things, it actually helps you overcome that much better. But
Yeah.
that's a whole nother stress and
Well,
emotional groove that we could do.
Well, I like the fact that you're talking about these changing situations, this variety. I want to just focus for just a second on this idea that context is really like this hidden variable in all of our decision making,
Mm.
right? That it's always there, and what worked in one situation won't necessarily help us in another section. And I think this is just to reinforce this idea that the right aphorism at the right time could be really helpful in the way our life is changing.
And I think this is the part where we're going like, oh, that aphorism that worked when we were 20 may not be the same
Right.
as it is when we're 40 or 60. And there's an aspect of this where the aphorism may not have the same impact. I think there's also another aspect of this is that aphorism's meaning could change as
Yeah.
we change.
Yeah.
Again, the never think know you know has taken on different meanings for me in
Ah.
as I've gone through my life, right? It started off as never think, it's this kind of uh nihilistic kind of piece of just, go out
Wow.
there and attack. Whereas now it is this don't jump to conclusions. Don't allow that system one thinking to override the system to thinking and all of our natural biases that we have that come into play.
I love that. That's such a great example. And you're the author of that aphorism, and yet it has become something that has morphed with you, and you've interpreted different things from it as your life has changed.
Yeah, well, I think aphorisms work that way, and
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't talk to James about this, but I would assume that that's part of the not the definition of an aphorism, but part of how they work.
Yeah. I if it's okay with you, I'd like to skip to like the third point that I was thinking about here. And that was that growth means updating the language that we live by. So just as you're talking about how the meaning of the aphorism changes, the actual the way that I was originally thinking about this is that the actual aphorisms that we rely on at different times in our life could be different because of
Mhm.
these different changes, right? The changing up our behaviors and our values are signs of growth, right? Not weaknesses. So adapting to different aphorisms around our life can be helpful, can be instructive, as we talked about. They can guide us or orient us in our decision making.
Yeah, and I think the same thing, if the meaning of the aphorism doesn't change and you've changed, holding on to the wrong aphorism can lead us or guide us in the wrong direction.
Right.
So it
Right.
keeps us solving yesterday's problem, not today's problem.
Oh, yeah, that's which is really not a good thing. Um, I have a couple of examples here that I think are kind of fun, though. When I think about early career, and this is attributed to Lao Tzu from The Art of War. Early in your career, you might be thinking about opportunity, and you might be thinking, as Lao Tzu said, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." Now, that is really applicable if you're 20 years old or 22 and you're getting started on a first job. You've got hopefully a long road ahead of you, but framing it as, I need to take this first step, I think is a really wonderful thing to keep in mind.
Eh, I love that, right? And it's not necessarily the same if you're in the later part of your career. To apply this to that part of your career. Now, it could apply to, what you're doing after your career,
Oh,
but
yeah.
that may not necessarily apply to your career when you're our age, Tim, you know.
Or if you've
Oh,
changed careers.
or it could. I mean, we
That's right.
started this podcast 8 years ago, and that started with one, conversation. Like, oh, we could record. It's that
And
one step that we said, oh, this will be easy. It'll be
we were just
simple.
punks then, though. Like you were like what, 25? I was like 26 or
Yeah.
something.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. But all right, you have some other ones around mid-career and later career from just
Yeah.
aphorisms that you kind of apply here. Yeah.
Yeah. Rutan, the Buddhist Zen Buddhist, said for kind of a mid-career framing is, you cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Like mid-career, you need to be gathering up some steam, right? When you're kind of deep into what you're doing, you need to make sure that your cup is being filled and that you have something to pour from it.
Yeah, you need to protect your energy, right? That's this idea of, so it helps you in understanding how to live your life. It is that guide again. Okay.
Yeah. And then later
Later
in your
career? Yeah.
later career, let's go to Charlie Munger, the great partner of and co-founder of Berkshire Hathaway. Charlie Munger said, "The best thing a human being can do is to help another human being know more." That's our job, man. That's what we do.
Yeah.
I'd like to think it is, at least. We're going to hopefully help other people know more, and from that, hopefully make better decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love all of that. I think it's just fantastic. So, I think one of the things that James said in this is that aphorisms are for living. And
Yeah.
we don't think about writing in those types of aphorisms or poems or other types of things as these things for living but they're these guides. They help us in how we show up every single day in our life. And that, I think, is the power of them.
So, if you had a groove question for our listeners, Kurt, what would you be challenging our listeners to think about or to do even?
This week, I think what they should be doing is thinking about, is there an aphorism that has helped you get you to where you are? And to our point of, making sure we're not living in the past, is there an aphorism which might be holding you back now? One that you had held on to that either hasn't morphed with you or no longer serves you.
I think that's a good thing to be thinking about this week. I do.
Okay. Well, there you go. Okay to wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Closing comments from you? Anything?
Just hopefully that you were able to understand a little bit more about aphorisms. Maybe it has inspired you to write down a favorite aphorism that you have and put it up in front of you and use that in your life to help you make better decisions this week as you go out and find your group.